Southern literature is defined as American literature about the southern United States or by writers from the region. Characteristics include a focus on a common Southern history, which includes the Civil War, slavery, and Reconstruction, the significance of family, the sense of community and one's role in it, a sense of justice, the region's dominant religion, which is Christianity, and the burdens and rewards religion often brings, along with issues of racial tension, land, and the promise it brings, a sense of social class and place, and the use of Southern dialect. During the 17th and 18th centuries, English colonists in the southern part of the American colonies produced a number of notable works. Two of the most famous were early memoirs of Virginia by Captain John Smith, whose account of the founding of Jamestown in the 1610s and 20s, and William Byrd II's secret plantation diary kept in the early 18th century. Both sets of recollections are critical documents in early Southern history. Both of these documents also showed there is a distinct culture to the region. Paul Hamilton Hayne posthumously edited and published the poems of Henry Timrod, with more of Timrod's more famous poems in 1873, including his Ode, sung on the occasion of decorating the graves of the Confederate dead at Magnolia Cemetery, Charleston, South Carolina, 1867, and the Cotton Bowl. Paul Hamilton Hayne himself was a poet whose works emphasized romantic verse, long narrative poems, and ballads. His work was highly descriptive of nature, and he became known throughout the country as the unofficial poet laureate of the South. Novelist William Gilmore Simms is remembered for his strong support of slavery and for his opposition to Uncle Tom's Cabin. His anti-Tom novel was called The Sword and the Distaff. Edgar Allan Poe declared Simms to be the best novelist which this country has on the whole produced, and is immeasurably the greatest writer of fiction in America. His novels of frontier life and the American Revolution celebrated the history of South Carolina. Like Romanticism, he produced idealized portraits of slavery and Southern life. John Pendleton Kennedy from Baltimore, Maryland, wrote the novel Swallow Barn, which offered a colorful sketch of Virginia plantation life. But not all noteworthy Southern authors during this period were white. Frederick Douglass from Talbot County, Maryland, also a former slave, wrote Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, which is perhaps the most famous first-person account of black slavery in the antebellum South. Harriet Jacobs, who was born a slave in Edenton, North Carolina, recounted her experiences in bondage in North Carolina in Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. During the second half of the 19th century, the South lost the Civil War and suffered through what many white Southerners considered a harsh occupation known as Reconstruction. During this time period, in place of the anti-Tom literature of the first half of the 19th century, there came poetry and novels about the lost cause of the Confederacy. This nostalgic literature began to appear almost immediately after the war ended. These writers idealized the defeated South and its lost culture. Prominent writers with this point of view were poets Abram Joseph Ryan from Hagerstown, Maryland, Sidney Lanier from Macon, Georgia, fiction writer Thomas Nelson Page from Beaver Dam in Hanover County, Virginia. African-American writer Charles W. Chestnut from Cleveland, Ohio, dismissed this nostalgia by pointing out the racism and exploitation of blacks that happened during this time period in the South. In 1884, Mark Twain from Florida, Missouri, published what is arguably the most influential Southern novel of the 19th century, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Ernest Hemingway said of the novel, "All modern American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain, called Huckleberry Finn." This statement applies even more so to Southern literature because of the novel's frank dealings with issues such as race and violence. Kate Chopin from St. Louis, Missouri, focused her writing largely on the Acadian/Cajun communities of Louisiana. She established her literary reputation with the Stuart Shorey collections, Bayou Folk, and A Night in Acadia. These stories offered not only a sociological portrait of a specific Southern culture, but also furthered the legacy of the American short story as a unique and vital and complex narrative genre. She also wrote The Awakening, which gained her notoriety of a different sort. The novel itself shocked audiences with its frank and unsentimental portrayal of female sexuality and psychology. It paved the way for the Southern novel as both a serious genre and one that tackled the complex and emotional lives of its characters. Thomas Dixon Jr. of Shelby, North Carolina, is perhaps best known for writing a trilogy of novels about Reconstruction, one of which was entitled The Klansman. This eventually became the inspiration for D.W. Griffith's infamous 1915 film, The Birth of a Nation. The Southern Renaissance of the 1920s and 30s began with William Faulkner and Thomas Wolfe. Faulkner of New Albany, Mississippi, brought new techniques such as stream of consciousness and complex narrative techniques to his writing. Thomas Wolfe wrote 4 lengthy novels, many short stories and dramatic works, and some novellas. He is known for mixing highly original, poetic, enthusiastic prose with autobiographical writing. His books reflect the American culture of the period. Nonfiction writer H.L. Mencken shocked and astounded readers with his satiric writing highlighting the inability of the South to produce anything of cultural value. In reaction to Mencken's essay, The Sahara of Beaux-Arts, the Southern agrarians called for a return to the South's agrarian past and despised the rise of Southern industrialism and urbanization. They noted that creativity and industrialism weren't compatible and desired the return to a lifestyle that would afford the Southerner leisure, a quality the agrarians most felt conducive to creativity. One of the main novels of the late 1930s, Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, depicts the experiences of a spoiled daughter of a well-to-do Southern plantation owner who must use every means at her disposal to come out of the poverty she finds herself in after Sherman's march to the sea. Southern literature following the Second World War grew thematically as it embraced the social and cultural changes in the South resulting from the American Civil Rights Movement. There were more female and African American writers that were being accepted as part of the Southern culture. Sterling Allen Brown, born on the campus of Howard University in Washington, D.C., published his first book of poetry in 1932 called Southern Road. Southern Road is a collection of poetry with rural themes and treated the simple lives of poor black country folk with poignancy and dignity and used authentic dialect and structures. Carson McCullers, from Columbus, Georgia, wrote novels, short stories, and 2 plays, as well as essays and some poetry. Her first novel, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, explores the spiritual isolation of misfits and outcasts of the South. The works of Shirley Ann Grau of New Orleans are set mainly in the Deep South and explore issues of race and gender, one of those being The Keepers of the House. The story is set in rural Alabama and covers 7 generations of a family that lived in the same house, and in the process formed their own identity. This is seen as a metaphor for the long-established families of the Deep South. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee of Monroeville, Alabama, is one of the most highly praised Southern novels of the 20th century. The plot and characters are loosely based on the author's observations of her family and neighbors, as well as on an event that occurred near her hometown in 1936. As a Southern Gothic novel, the primary themes of To Kill a Mockingbird involve racial injustice and the destruction of innocence. It is also noted that Lee also addresses issues of class, courage, compassion, and gender roles in the American Deep South. As of today, the South is undergoing a number of cultural and social changes, which include rapid industrialization and deindustrialization, and also an influx of immigrants. The result is that the exact definition of what constitutes Southern literature is changing. Some critics specify that the previous definitions of Southern literature still hold, while some suggest otherwise. But even if the definition of true Southern literature is in question, the South will always maintain a distinct culture all of its own.
When I die, oh, bury me deep down at the end of Old Chestnut Street. Place the stones at my head.